hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Page Turners Plus. The last time you saw and heard us, we reviewed Angela Barry's The Drowned Forest. Today, we'll be interviewing Angela Barry. Welcome, Angela.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It is our pleasure. We had a wonderful discussion of your book when we reviewed it. So, to start off the questions, I think I want to start with the historical context because I think that really drew me in, especially towards the end of the novel, because of a very special mention, but that will come later. So, the novel refers to several important Bermudian historical events. Could you have told the story without referring to those?
I don't think so, Roger, because one of the central planks of the book is the connectedness between the past and the present. And so, although the book evolves in real time, but as we go through that time, we are often brought to other periods, to things in the past, and those things are there to give some sort of weight to what is happening in the present, to give some sort of explanation for for what is currently going on, the kind of conflicts, crises, hidden agendas, all of those things could not be really explained, as far as I'm concerned, without the backstory. The backstory is everything. And the other thing is that Bermuda's backstory is very similar to the backstory of the Caribbean, but there are differences. And as I am very keen to make the connection between Bermuda and the Caribbean, I first of all wanted to make sure that it was clearer, because people have a certain image of Bermuda, wealthy, disinterested politically, and so on, and that for me needed to be really cleared up. And so no, I could not. I don't think I could have written the book. It would have been a very different book. Let's put it that way. Yeah, it would not have been remotely the same without the history part. Yeah.
I definitely appreciate that, and I think well, Eric wants to get in here because Eric is the historian on the panel. Eric.
No, I mean that's your points are well taken. Excuse me. And yeah, I just got a follow up question. There is as a writer, excuse me, as a novelist, um, how much of a historian do you have to be, and with that, how much liberty do you have with the source material?
Mm. Well, that's a great question. I've learned with interviewers, when somebody says, they ask a question and the interviewee says, that's a great question, it means that there's time going, now, how do I answer that question? Well, it is a great question. But I, even in other things that I've written, I have been very aware of the historical context. I enjoyed doing history as a child, and it has always been with me to see what happened in the past. So it's always been part of what I do as a writer. But I also feel that there are not what people call I can't remember which Republican said it, this business about alternate facts. I don't believe in alternate facts, although even the use of alternate, it should be alternative. But anyway, I don't believe in that. So I know when there have been other writers writing about Bermuda who have completely manipulated facts. And I try absolutely not to do that. there's the fact, and then there's the interpretation of the fact. There you have liberty, but the actual fact, you do not have liberty to. The issue with people of the African diaspora in the West is that the facts were often hidden. You know, the facts were hidden, so it's new facts that are emerging. Not that the facts have been misrepresented, but that they just were not part of what was called history. So yes, I believe that you have to be true to what has proven to be facts, but then the writer probably has more leeway than the historian to interpret those facts and see how that event, for instance, what the impact was on the lives of people. So you can have one event, like emancipation, and look at the difference between the effect on the slave holder and the enslaved. Completely different response, and quite rightly so. Yeah, so no, I don't like to fiddle with historical fact. If I put it there, it's meant that I have gone and made sure that it is correct, and not just what I would have liked for to have happened. Yeah.
Paula?
I don't want to turn this into a history conference,
Right.
but I have one follow-up question.
Right.
In your writing process, what came first, the characters or the historical context?
Right. That's a great question. Well, actually, it's quite a straightforward question here. Almost always in the past, my writing has started with character because, for me, the character is really paramount. If you choose between character-driven and plot-driven, mine will always be character-driven, and it still is in this book. However, in this book, I had written an anthology of short stories. Some of them were from Bermuda, and some were from what I call beyond Bermuda. The next thing I did was my novel, the first novel about the slave port Gore in Senegal, and that had nothing to do with Bermuda. So I said, I do really have to write something, a novel about Bermuda, how complex, difficult it is, and I want to, it's only 64,000 people. It's not a lot of people. And so I need to try to write about all of the Bermudas because it's very, very fragmented, as you have seen by what you've read. And so that was the main idea. So the idea was there for what had to be the root idea. Everything is about roots. And so once I was there and I had this image of the cedar root, then the core characters were not difficult for me to find. I don't know if I told you, but I made this as part of my doctoral thesis. I did this creative writing PhD at the University of Lancaster. And so I went back to some of the early things I submitted to the university. And it was clear that the characters were not yet there, but the idea was there. And so it was for me to find those characters. And once that was the case, it was easy for me because that's what I normally do. And once I found the characters, then I looked at Bermuda's history to see in what way they could be connected to that history. So then it became much more character driven, which is my normal mode of writing anyway. hope that answers the question.
No, I really appreciate. I'm really appreciating this history lesson, and I mean, I guess I could ask it now because it's becoming more and more relevant to ask it. So, Angela, I'm from Nevis. Actually,
Yay!
that's where I reside.
I
and I'm-
love
and I'm
those.
not-
Yeah, I love the interest in Nevis. Yeah.
And so I'll ask like a sort of two-part question to get it
Mm,
all in. So
right.
in the novel, you raise the Bermuda Nevis connection,
Mhm,
which many people might not know if they don't do like additional reading outside of the novel.
mhm.
So you mentioned the Bermuda Nevis connection. There's also a striking similarity between Masquerade and Gombe and many other
Yeah,
art forms across the Caribbean.
right, of course.
So we get that we see that Nevis Bermuda Nevis connection there,
Mhm.
and we also find out that Joy's parents were killed in a boating disaster in the later part of the 20th century, I think.
Mhm.
So my two-part question is: were you deliberate in raising the Bermuda Nevis connection? And was the boating accident, was that a reference to a real boating accident? And if so,
Mm.
which boating accident?
Right. Okay. Well, Bermuda has a very strong connection between St. Kitts and Nevis. Um, Again, I'm sorry about the history, but most for the first 200 years of settlement, the 17th, 18th century, the enslaved population did not come directly from Africa. They came through the Caribbean, and they came from all parts of the Caribbean. So that's an interesting cultural point anyway, because these were people who had been seasoned, and so the African experience was slightly, distant, not fully distant, but it certainly was not. It was not their immediate lives. They had not been born in Africa. So that's one thing. So most Bermudians, well, some Bermudians have been able to trace their ancestry. But what happened in the early part of the 20th century was that the British, who liked Bermuda for its strategic location in the middle of the North Atlantic, so it fortified the island, and they wanted to build a dockyard. So the Royal Naval Dockyard was put forward as the idea. And then they went to the Caribbean looking for people to come to work. And many of them came from St. Kitts and Nevis. And they changed the landscape of the Black population. The most important way, other than like marrying Bermudian women, was to kind of change the face of the Gombe figure. The Gombe figure had been with us from the beginning, but it was very, kind of haphazard from what I can see. But the people who came from St. Kitts and Nevis put the stamp on it that you recognized, and since then, most people or many Black Bermudians can trace direct ancestry to St. Kitts and Nevis. So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the loss of life of Joy's parents, here we have kind of a bit of a fog in my mind when I was writing that. I felt that her parents would have to be from the Caribbean, and if it was going to be the Caribbean, it probably was going to be St. Kitts Nevis, and I knew. And I hadn't done the history homework. I knew in my memory that there had been a boating accident where people had died. And another thing, Roll J, I'll tell you that there was a famous teacher who came to there was one Black school. There was one school for Black children up until the 1970s. There was one Black school, the high school, and people who wanted to do something more. There was only one school that they could go to. And this teacher, called Miss Byron, she came to the school as a teacher, and she was beloved. She was beloved by the population. And she eventually went back home. And she died in that catastrophe, the Christina disaster. Yeah, she died. So and she was mourned in the whole island, because she had made such a big difference in the lives of children. My sister was the one who told me, because she had had Miss Byron as her teacher. So all of that was going on. So I said, well, I have been to Nevis a long, long time ago, and I know that ferry is a ferry ride from St. Kitts to Nevis. So I said, well, yeah, that looks like, it didn't have to be the big disaster, but nevertheless, it's a place that I'm sure is not the first time that it's had death through drowning. Yeah. So yeah, that's. I was very thrilled to get to know that we had that Nevis connection. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much for that, Eric.
Oh my goodness, that reminded me of the Haiti New Orleans connection. So much changed because of Haitian immigration into New Orleans in the 19th century, especially our carnival traditions.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm tasked with another question though. So my question is about the cedar. Why does the Bermudian cedar, and in particular the root of the cedar tree, which was dredged up from the ocean in 2002, and even in roots in a more general sense, like roots, like family roots, loom so large in the novel?
Okay, well, I have to say that if you remember in the prologue of the book, talking about the hurricane people and that sort of thing, and it says some dreamed of the ocean engulfing the sacred forests. So I don't think anybody that I know of has used the word sacred when talking about the cedar, but it's not too far from that. And I'll tell you why. First of all, well, of course, the cedar is the ancient tree in our landscape. From what we know of the 2002 discovery, that it was there at least 7,000 years before, and probably a lot longer. So it's like the original inhabitant of the island, and so it has status from that point of view alone. Because it's been around so long, and Bermuda has been in that position so long, and in that position I mean it is a hurricane island. So when the storms come off the coast of Africa, if they turn north, they will be coming towards Bermuda. And the cedar is a tree that will withstand the hurricane. When all the other trees are down, the cedar is still there. So it's a survivor. And then the other thing is that when people started to, after settlement, Bermuda had a different trajectory from the islands to our south. Some English, traveler in the 19th century said Bermuda is a pile of rocks. That's how fantastic it was. It only became rich in the 20th century. It was always the poor relative, and was not a plantation society. There was not the plantation society that is, that defined the Caribbean. It was always trying to find some way to survive. Tried pearl diving, tried tobacco raising, nothing. And then they looked to see, what do we have? We have all of these cedar trees. And so the cedar became the source of the shipbuilding industry, which really made Bermuda into a seafaring nation. So those cedar trees were made into ships. The cedar was more seaworthy than oak, which they would have had to import. And they created these very swift and reliable sloops, which went from Bermuda to the Caribbean, to the American colonies, and for trade And so that is how we survive. So without the cedar, we wouldn't have had any of this. We would still be trying to find pearls from, from the ocean. The cedar was the salvation. And just this morning, I sort of remembered something that I had seen in a book. But during slavery, 39 lashes would be meted out to anybody who cut or injured a cedar tree, because it was that important. So yes, it's almost sacred, but it is certainly absolutely important to the way, and people love it. You know, the wood is beautiful, it smells wonderful, and we identify with it very strongly.
Paula?
On the note of 30 lashes, you said?
39.
39.
I
Yes.
don't know why 39, like a random number.
Yeah. On that note, did you have truth and reconciliation considerations in mind when you wrote this novel?
Yes, well, actually, I didn't have it in mind. I did not have it in mind. What I had in mind was that we as Bermudian people of different, of different types, we only talk to people of our same community. So the impetus of the book was for people of these different communities to see a truth, to find a truth, particularly the truths that had been pushed down, hidden. So it was really about getting them to a point where they could face those kind of difficult truths that, a slave society would absolutely have. So really, that was what I had in mind, and I had no destination. I really had no destination as when I started to write. I did not have the destination as reconciliation, because since I finished writing the book, I've been drawn back to the Archbishop Desmond Tutu's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which actually were being held just as I was starting to write the book. So at some sort of subconscious level, it certainly would have been there, but it was not conscious. But I just wanted to get to the point where the people, the white Bermudians, the black Bermudians, the Portuguese Bermudians, could start looking honestly at their, at what they were at that moment and what had happened in the past, to create them. And so we then had, we coming towards the end, and in the last year of it took 14, 15 years. And towards the end of my journey, George Floyd was killed or executed. It was a world event, and I said, "Oh, I have to go. I have to go back into the book," and I did, because the pressing need for change in people, when something so blatant could have happened in, the greatest democracy on earth, it was stunning to me that people who had been raised in certain traditions, they were still blind. They were blind. They didn't get it. Particularly, when you have the ones who didn't get it and would not want to get it, but then there were people who felt that they did get it, who thought that they were quite liberal, quite, progressive and so on. But there were still many things that they had not come to terms with or even realized. So yeah, I had to go back. So in the end, I said, well, there can be no happy ending. There can be only the beginning of something, the beginning of conversation, the beginning of thinking. In the John Forest, Tess has to deal with Simmons, whom she's always had, without thought. He's always been there doing everything, making sure that, her life can be lived the way she wants it. And now she can't see him that way anymore. She sees him as a completely different person. He's a stranger. She's grown up with him and he is a stranger to her. And so she is at the beginning. And Simmons is also at the beginning. How much is he going to push? We don't know. I found it very interesting. This is a little bit off the point, but you've all, I guess, read about Laura Trevelyan from the BBC, who has, gone down to Grenada, where her family over the centuries had 6, very thriving sugar plantations, and she's going to go down and with her family members and give a public apology to the people of Grenada, and £100,000 to the development of Grenada. So, she felt that she came from a great family, a great historians, all of them historians. And she was not aware that this was her family history. So what I'm getting at is that in the end of the book, there is also the possibility of the discussion of reparation. Is Tess going to be involved in that? Can she see her way clear to say that? So for me, there is only the possibility of an opening up. That's for me what was the ending of the book. So Desmond Tutu he created the model, but the truth has to be first. You can't get the reconciliation without the truth. And so yes, Ubuntu. That's the African term for that.
I know your book has been on market for less than a year.
Mm-hmm.
So the question that I wanted to add to that, because I know you mentioned like reparations, etc., was how has the book been received in Bermuda in the last few months?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's been received well. It has been received well. Like every writer, you're never sure what people are going to think of what you've written. You own what you do. I mean, you do it, you own it, but you know that you're sending it out and it's beyond you then. So I've had, I'm kind of busy with sort of presentations. Oh, can you come and talk to this group and that? And it has been well received. But I'm never sure. One is never sure. The sales have been good, but I know that for some people there would have been difficulties. There will be difficult moments in the book, very difficult moments. But to be honest, it was difficult writing those moments. It's not just it was difficult, and those moments, the cellar and the Tess's understanding of what happened, and also the death of Rosie. These are very difficult things for me to write. That's the only way a writer can do it, is to enter in, fully into that moment, into those people. What are those? What's each of them feeling? What is going on here? So, So when you think you finished, then you go back and think that's not quite it. That's one of the great things about my experience doing this, is understanding that the importance of having the humility to draft and redraft and redraft. There are a lot of things that I wrote, especially in the early stages, which just didn't make the cut, and that's all right too. I learned early that if you're writing a story or not, I never wrote short stories, but if you're writing a story and there's a part in there that's so fantastic, you're so pleased with it, oh yeah, I got that right. And then you get some objective, person with a big head is, oh no, that has to go. So shocking, so awful. And I eventually got to understand that that person with the big brain was looking at the thing as a whole. And if there's something that's sort of standing out that much, it has to go. And you can do something else with that, because that has power of its own. It's not that it was bad, it just had no place in that particular ensemble of thoughts. So yes, George Lamming was that. Yeah. So I've been very lucky with my mentors, I must say. I have.
Eric?
Yes. So a real concise question here. Why are your main protagonists women?
Well, there are 50% women in the world. That's the first. That's the first and most telling answer. I tend to write about women. I am one. And it's not that I feel that I cannot write about men. I mean, there are men, important male characters in this book. But in its original conception, it was really a book about women. And the three women who are trying, with Genesis at the center, they have to work together, despite the fact they can't stand each other. They come from different worlds. They have to work together. And, they bring with them issues of relationships, marriages, children, all of that, which is really traditionally seen as the woman's world. And but it's in it's in the new millennium. So yeah, I have no apologies to make about writing about. I'm perfectly happy to say it is a book about women, namely. Look, I have two wonderful sons, and I found out more about men by raising boys than any other experience yet. So I love men.
Well,
but thus they didn't have a big role in this book.
That's okay. And we men, we have to read woman-centric novels.
Yes, because
good ones.
male-centric models have just been the norm. It's just like black and white. The pendulum is now swinging in another direction, and so the world of the woman is now seen as absolutely layered and complicated. And there are things where there is connection between male thought and female, and then there's the divergence. So and also I am one woman, that's it. I do not represent women, and that was something that I was aware of when I was writing the book. Not so much about gender, but I'm writing about one Black Bermudian woman, one white Bermudian. So not waving a flag. I am representing all people of this group. It's simply I belong to this group. That's it. And with all of my individual characteristics, because a lot of people like to. It's easier to say, well, oh, this is what Black women want. This is what white women. I don't go there at all.
You mentioned Tess and Simmons earlier.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I have a question. Mm-hmm. Tess has a spider-shaped birthmark. And it serves as a literary device to connect her to Simmons.
Right.
Now, the tree root is also spider shaped.
Mhm.
And I was wondering if all of that is all coincidental. The shape of the birthmarks that two people have,
Mhm.
and all of Tess's family and two
Right.
people
Mhm.
in the novel have,
Right.
and the root. Is it coincidental that they're all spider
Oh,
shaped?
no. Well, again, it's I have to admit or confess that the very first story that I wrote, this would have been in the 1980s, was about how a girl, and in this case, a very specific, this was my grandmother, how she learned about who her father was. And her father was a white man, and she didn't know who he was. And somehow, the story is about how she got to know. And as both my grandmother and my mother were no longer in the world, I had to imagine this scene, and so that was the literary device I used then, the birthmark, because these birthmarks are ridiculous. Can I just do a red herring? I knew a man whose family trait was that he had a tiny little sixth finger right here. And yeah, he was happily married, one thought. And then all of a sudden, there was somebody knocking at the door with an infant who had a sixth finger. Because these birthmarks will definitely make you, will just take the cover off your secret. And so I thought that this was a way to do it, and to do it at a moment when it was most powerful. So yes, when I started writing, I knew that birthmark was going to be important. There are a lot of things that did happen coincidentally. I don't know if you got to see the slideshow, but you can, if you do, there's a picture of the actual root, because this whole bringing up of the root thing was real. It is in a kind of spider shape. So writers use everything, and it's sometimes it's coincidental, sometimes you plan it, and then there it is. Another thing that was total coincidence, but then I used it. Genesis has these two young men who are interested in her, and the first one is really the important one, the one from childhood, and I wanted to give him a kind of unusual name. So this was very early in the days, and when I first started the book, I had the Tempest in my mind, because the Tempest is, in theory, about the discovery. Well, it was written soon after the discovery of Bermuda. And so I thought of calling him Ariel, and then, no, I don't think so. But I found the name Uriel. And so Uriel is developed. He's the Gombe. And then there's this expat, as we call them. And the name Hugh just seemed like a solid British name, And then at some point I said, and then she, Genesis and Uriel call each other, I'm G and you're you. And so one is called you and one is called Hugh. Now that was complete accident. But the thing that the writer does, you use the accidents. And so there was that. She calls him by the wrong name. Not a good thing. She calls him by the wrong name. So that's when Uriel knows that there's something afoot. But yes, so you have things that you plan, and then you have things that you don't plan. But when you see them, you use them. So I don't know whose question.
Oh, no. Just to add there, that moment with the Hugh and you thing was a moment of absolute brilliance, because on my first read of that particular area in the book, I was like, is this a typo? Then I read on, and then I was like, oh, There we go. That's when it hit me. I was like, oh yeah, that was brilliant
Yeah, yeah,
writing
but
there.
it's just
Mhm.
um, I think Wilson Harris said, he when he wrote the Palace of the Peacock, it was like 500-600 pages long, and then it was reduced to like 100 and whatever pages. And he said that when he read the original manuscript, he was looking for clues because the clues are buried in there. I mean, the clues you have put them in without even knowing that they're clues, and that's when you come and do your work as a writer. So I don't compare myself to Wilson Harris or any great writer, but I do know that it's good to have to know the classics, the classic Caribbean writers. It's good and it's important because you don't want to be trying to reinvent the wheel. The wheel has been invented in Caribbean literature, very much so, and so the writers who are currently writing, they just are taking it, they're taking it to another stage. But the foundation is very strong. Yeah.
So we're almost out of time, and
Oh
this
wow!
this happens every time we do a show. But one final question that I want to get in was, you appear to signal time of the year by referring to various Bermudian festivals. We have
Mhm.
Summer's Day, Cup Match, Emancipation. You have the Christmas Gombe parade, and you have the Festa do Espírito Santo. So why did you choose to do this? Did you do it to make the novel distinctly Bermudian, or?
Oh yes! Oh, absolutely. I was looking. There were two cycles of two 1 year cycles, and of course, like I'm sure every place, your year is punctuated by these events. And this is whether it's going to Cup Match or going to following the Gombes or whatever. You identify yourself as a Bermudian by being involved, cooking masses of food, all of that sort of thing. This is an absolutely specific point in the year for people to celebrate or to pray to whatever. This identifies you with a particular group. Most of the all of the festivals that you mentioned, they all started in particular groups, but as now 2023, they are now more and more being seen as belonging to everybody. They never did in the past. They did not do. They absolutely did not belong to everybody in the past. But slight movement towards that has happened, and I'm happy to say yes. So if I can say that I wrote the book with two readers in mind: the Bermudian reader, and for the people who are not Bermudian. So for the Bermudian reader will see these festivals and immediately recognize them, and hopefully be glad. For the person who is not Bermudian, they will look at them with different eyes altogether. But hopefully, I mean, I've never wanted to write in a way that excludes people who are not from this particular place. And so I wanted it to be something that they see for the first time, but nevertheless learning and perhaps can connect with things in their own national life. So I wanted to do that, particularly the Caribbean. Unfortunately, what I call, Bermuda is 900 miles away from the Bahamas, who are not fully Caribbean, but Jamaica is not, is fully Caribbean and not Atlantic. We are an island whose history most resembles the history of the Caribbean region. Not every Bermudian identifies with this, but it is true. I mean, this is one of the facts that we were talking about. It is true. Bermuda's history most resembles that of the Caribbean region. And for that reason, and in fact, the peoples are very much the same. So why not? But there is still some resistance. People believe the hype that Bermuda is another world. It is not. It's part of the world. It is part of a world history. Like every other place, it has its peculiarities. You could get 39 lashes for injuring a tree. So that's pretty specific.
I think that's a bit gory but wonderful note to end our wonderful interview with you on. The next time our viewers see and hear us, we'll be reviewing Dalma Llanos Figueroa's Woman of Endurance. But before we go, we have a lovely reading by Angela Barry for you. Thank you for joining us and have a lovely day.
So in this excerpt, the island is being battered by Category 4 Hurricane Fabian. Even Tess's house, which has weathered 200 years of storms, cannot withstand its violent winds. As parts of the house collapse around them, Tess and Hugh have to run for their lives to the only place where they might have some safety, an old cellar. Hugh gives the door a vicious kick, which breaks up some of the ancient paint encrusting the hinges. With one frenzied pull, he opens it, shoves Tess in, and scrambles through. They push across the 4 heavy bolts, fall down the steep staircase made slick and deadly by the torrent, and land painfully on a dirt floor. The ceiling of the cellar is so low that he hits his head against the rough trunks of old cedars. Head down, he inches across the floor, feeling Tess's breath on his neck, trying to distance himself from the water pooling at the foot of the steps. He finds the wall furthest away, and they sit down next to each other, leaning against it with their legs braced, praying that the groaning door will hold. Images flicker across his eyes, curtains reaching out for him, chairs flying like paper planes, roof slats being ripped away. Tess is saying nothing. She slumped forward, her body gathered in a tight, shuddering knot. Once her arms lash out in sharp defensive movements and then are still. Hugh can't keep silent over what he has seen. I saw it, Tess, the eye, the edge of it. When the roof collapsed, I saw it. I looked up to where the roof had been and saw a patch of blue sky with the sun shining from it. It lasted for just an instant and then darkness. He wishes he could lose himself in sleep, as Tess seems to have done. As the beast rages on overhead, images and sounds grip his mind, taking him into a terrifying and trackless hinterland. He tries to think about the ocean, and as usual, it calms him. What would it be like beyond the reef? Mountainous seas with no land to cramp them, waves towering and cresting, illuminated by lightning, an ocean in tumult with no horizons. And under the waves, currents of warm sea water tumbling and boiling beneath the surface, shifting continents of sand, grinding down and sweeping clean the mountain ranges of the deep. Blue surrounds him, the blue of the calmest seas. He's diving through water pierced by sunlight. He sees a figure darting through the light-flecked indigo. He races towards it and sees a girl, a young woman, beckoning him with dark, slender arms. They play together, endlessly delighting in the freedom and the grace of this kingdom. She touches his face, then swims away towards the black ocean floor. He hears someone calling out. It's Tess. Keep away, she's shouting, flailing her arms. All of you, keep away. She still seems asleep, her arms dropping to her sides. In a whisper, she repeats a phrase over and over. They called it, they called it, they. Hugh leans forward to listen more closely, but can't find any meaning in her refrain. He slumps back again and shuts his eyes. They called it the breaking room, where they kept the slaves.
You can win when you top it up, switch it up, side it up, on the love. Easy wins with Flow. Easy wins.
Get the easy summer vibes with over $70,000 in cash and prizes. Just top up $10 or more. Activate a prepaid plan, switch to Flow, or bundle your home services to get your share of $70,000 in cash, data, Samsung Galaxy devices, shopping vouchers, and more.
You can win when you top it up, switch it up, side it up, on the love. Easy wins with Flow.